So, a few months back we spoke about Burning Crusade Classic and the likelihood of if we would ever see it again. A chat coming off the time when we were still waiting to get into Cataclysm Classic, and many players were jumping off the bandwagon as we said goodbye to Wrath of the Lich King with no era realms in sight. And whilst personally for me I've been enjoying Cataclysm Classic and I'm looking forward to the War Within for retail, many players are still out there shouting into what feels like the abyss, saying they still want Burning Crusade and Wrath of the Lich King back, to return with era servers similar to how we've seen vanilla. And to summarise previously what we spoke about, I mentioned that if we are to see Burning Crusade return, I thought it would likely be the start of 2025, when Cataclysm Classic is pretty much over as we'll be in Dragon Soul by then, and probably waiting for Mists of Pandaria Classic if that's on the way, with Season of Discovery potentially coming into its last few months where we'll certainly be venturing around endgame, and the War Within will have a solid footing in retail and been going for a fair while at that point, as it is due to be released in September 2024. For me this makes sense timing wise, as it'll probably be a low tide of content for each of the main versions of WoW that are around at that point, but specifically Cataclysm Classic. And releasing Burning Crusade era servers stands the chance not only to retain players who might become bored, but to also get back some players in the meantime. Now for me that makes logical sense and is such a sensible timeline and decision, it almost certainly won't be happening. But more interestingly, why is it that so many players want specifically Burning Crusade back still? Well, let's take a look. But just before we jump in, feel free to like and subscribe if you're new here, as it helps me out a bunch. So thanks very much indeed. Now, let's get on with it. So I think the first overall point to Burning Crusade is that the expansion itself became what you'd probably call nostalgia justified, once we went through it again in Classic WoW. And by that it means through re-experiencing the expansion so many years later after its original release. It wasn't just a longing for the past that held everyone's loving memories of the game. Classic Burning Crusade simply confirmed all those long-term beliefs about how great the game itself actually was, i.e. the nostalgia for Burning Crusade wasn't solely coming from the good times and the people you played with, although that obviously is a big part of it. The nostalgia was justified by the fact the overall experience of the expansion and its content was actually just very good, outside of the people I played with, nor the fact that I'm trying to regain some sense of long lost captured youth. And with Classic WoW now starting to get further away from what many people believe to be traditional Classic WoW post Wrath of the Lich King, they believe they should have full-time access to Burning Crusade in the same way we do vanilla. In WoW we speak a lot about how the vibe of content can greatly affect your experience of the expansion in contrast with gameplay. For example, at the start of Dragonflight, many people stated the vibe was simply off due to the rather friendly themed content and aspects we were seeing. This was then solved by going through the next two raids, Aberrus and Yggdrasil, by fighting giant monsters that were made of fire, which put things right back onto track for Dragonflight. And with Burning Crusade both in the expansion's name and the very first few moments you experience in the expansion, the vibe is hit right on the money, as you finally step through the huge dark portal to unveil a new world, only to be greeted by the Burning Legion's pit commander, leading an assault on the portal with, you guessed it, giant monsters made of fire. Based in Hellfire Peninsula, a barren wasteland filled with evil orcs, wild creatures, demons, and the iconic Fell Reavers. And yeah, there's lots of fire as well. And this feeling of exploration and experience was key to vanilla WoW, where you did feel like a small adventurer heading into a very dangerous and unknown land, realizing that not only the world but the universe that WoW was set in now is far bigger than you. We had a new world that felt open, diverse, with lots of detail, yet still didn't feel entirely overwhelming or over bloated, which is a theme that people regularly complain about now in WoW. It carried through the existing themes of vanilla that we loved and simply painted them in a different cover, bringing to life some of those scenes we got in the original Warcraft games, which at the point of BC's release wasn't all that long ago. To put it simply, Burning Crusade feels like pretty solid Warcraft, and this vibe ran throughout the content we were able to then experience in this new world also. So visually, the expansion looked great as noted, which worked well with a pretty good story drawn as a continuation from original Warcraft, with iconic characters such as Illidan and Kil'jaeden to make a fairly engaging and consistent leveling and endgame experience. As a result, we had some of the best zones in WoW's history to level in. Personally for me, expansion-wise, the best leveling experience may be only tied by Wrath, with Shadow Moon Valley being one of my favourite zones in all of WoW. And I think consistency is a big thing for Burning Crusade from level 60 to 70. It really doesn't feel like it slacks off or there are any zones I can't be bothered going through. Each area has its own unique style that still somehow ties into one another and makes a coherent leveling experience. And the dungeons we get to experience are regularly still loved by players. For example, the area in Terracar Forest where there's a whole tribunal of dungeons like Orkanai Crypts, Mana Tombs and Sethek Halls. Or Hellfire Citadel where we have Ramparts, Blood Furnace, Shattered Halls and of course, Magtheridon's lair below. And that's before we even mention the goofy yet very sinister Karazhan, the epic face-off with Illidan Black Temple, or even the excellent end to the expansion in Sunwell Plateau. There's a great cadence of content to keep you engaged from 60 to 70, and well, the endgame certainly doesn't disappoint either. It's made for some of WoW's most iconic content, and when revisiting it, it still lived up to the hype. Even in retail, when I use Chromie time to level up a new character, I regularly choose Burning Crusade to spam alts, just because of how great the dungeon design is in Burning Crusade. And in this great progression of content, it only works because the gameplay of BC feels very true to Classic, where we see the progression of classes beyond vanilla to give us that extra oomph. Much similar to why many people loved the initial changes we got in Season of Discovery, it feels like vanilla WoW but with a bit of extra spice. Yet there is still enough gaps in each class to make it seem like you had to patch up those holes in raids through differentiating who was in your raid, making each class feel vulnerable and valuable at the same time in a group setting. And much like vanilla, gear feels to have weight and keep relevance for longer throughout your experience and isn't always instantly replaced. Although it isn't the same rate as vanilla, it's still present for a lot of BC and your character still takes time to build up, something that slowly began to disappear towards the end of Wrath, i.e. your time sunken into the game feels rewarded back in many ways, and your gear really is earned for the majority of the time. However, as always, we have to touch on some of the issues that Burning Crusade era realms would bring with them. Now, for some people, they don't like the fact Burning Crusade can make Azeroth feel pretty irrelevant, or those that claim the addition of flying mounts killed the game, but realistically, if you're hyped for Burning Crusade realms, I'd guess these aren't much of an issue for you. But I think it's more the long-term challenges that era realms would face that see the main issues. I mean, if we take a look at vanilla era, it really does go through heavy bouts of either high popularity or being a ghost town, but that does come with the nature of era realms being available for other low tides of content during WoW's current content. And it's pretty much era realms' jobs to fill in the gaps when there's not much else to be doing in WoW, so I wouldn't worry about this part too much. But this does bring about issues that we see in vanilla, like the absolutely horrendous economy at times with auction house prices, or what happens when people stop running lower level vanilla content and the shouts for Dungeon Finder come into play. Are these just ignored? Or would the era realms be original Burning Crusade or BC with changes and additions for the long-term health of the game, like the initial group finder system we had prior to Dungeon Finder? Or would players want 100% original BC experience? And speaking of experience, what about those who want Burning Crusade but with higher experience rates? And if the community votes for that, does that turn other players away? How do we fix faction balancing? Would it be like Season of Discovery to avoid crazy BG queue times? And if servers aren't maintained, people will say the realms will be left for dead and no one wants them. So whilst there's demand for servers, it's not quite as simple as just turning them on and letting everyone have a go. Overall, I think the shouts for Burning Crusade and Wrath era realms are still warranted and should be fulfilled likely in 2025 if there's any chance of it happening. Like all versions of WoW, Burning Crusade does have its issues, but for me and many other players, in the balance of things, the good massively outweighs the bad, where even some of those less appealing factors are what play into the charm of it and the original trilogy of WoW. I think BC can't just be labelled as people want it back for nostalgia anymore. People got it back, played it and said, yep, it's still one of the best versions of WoW we've ever seen, and we want it back on a permanent and available basis like vanilla, and we would have a truly dedicated audience who would cement themselves in Burning Crusade consistently, in between those patches where players are off either busy in retail WoW or whatever the latest iteration of Classic is. And even if there was no maintenance on the realms, we've seen repeatedly that dedicated Classic fans do organise their own events that have come into actual existence, now hosted by Blizzard, just like Classic Hardcore, or the recent organisation of Player Fresh Realms in vanilla, as Blizzard isn't hosting any new Fresh Realms. So overall, I understand why players want Burning Crusade back, and I'd love to see some era realms set up in the near future. But what do you think? Is there any reasons I left out why you like Burning Crusade, or any reasons as to why we shouldn't see its return? Be sure to let me know in the comments below. As always though, take care out there, and I'll see you on the next one. As always, if you're new here, feel free to like and subscribe. And on that note, I think I'll say ta-ra for now, and I'll see you later.